I'm Marc Dresner, and this is Inside Clinical, a special interview series featuring experts and leaders at the forefront of drug development, clinical research, trials, and operations. Inside Clinical is brought to you by the Partnerships in Clinical Trials Conference. This is an annual event where clinical decision makers meet to accelerate science, innovate, and foster relationships, now approaching its 23rd year. Joining us today is Dr. Dalvir Gill. He is the CEO of Trancelerate Biopharma. Dalvir, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
Let's start with a question about Trancelerate. What is it and why was it formed?
So Trancelerate is a not-for-profit entity that was created about 6 months ago. And its inception really came about from discussions that have occurred over many years among leaders in the biopharmaceutical industry, R&D heads, discussing in various forums. And one forum that many R&D heads participate is a HEVA forum. Mm-hmm. And so for many years they've discussed, well, can we do something together and collectively as an industry to bring efficiency to the drug development process, develop more drugs, develop them more safely, bring them faster to the patients that need them. The paradigm of drug development has changed enormously. It used to cost about $140 million to develop a drug in the 70s. It cost well over $1 billion to bring a drug to market today. We funnel 5,000 to 10,000 compounds before we get a few into clinical trials. And of those few, a small percentage makes it to approval. And of those that make it to approval, only a percentage return the investment in R&D cost that the company may have invested. So the paradigm is shifting pretty substantially. Mm-hmm. We are running out of easy targets. We've conquered many of them, but the new disease areas we're tackling are more complex. Mm-hmm. Market forces have changed. Regulatory environment has changed. 80% of the scripts written in some countries are generics. Mm-hmm. So all these pressures basically have sent a very strong message to R&D heads and the industry as a whole. Business as usual is not going to be working for us. Mm-hmm. So Trancelerate came about from those discussions. They finally decided, we're going to do something about it. There are other initiatives ongoing, such as CTTI, such as IMI. They've been tackling some of these already and before Trancelerate was formed. But Trancelerate was formed to tackle some very specific areas. A number of us, or I should say my colleagues, got together and decided to look at all the different things we could do in a pre-competitive arena. Mm. So Trancellerate's been created in tackling efficiencies in clinical trials that outside of the area of the competition, the natural competition that does and should exist between biopharmaceutical companies. So we do a lot of things, very similar things, but in slightly different ways. How we start studies, how we monitor studies, how we have some of the electronic exchanges with sites and with doctors. And as such, those slightly small things, small variations brings enormous inefficiency to the process. Mm. So Trancelerate was put together to tackle some of these areas, and we decided to focus in on clinical trials initially. So Trancellerate's global, it's not a US-only organization. Mm-hmm. And at this point, we have launched a number of projects, which we can talk about whenever you're ready.
Terrific. Yeah, we'll get right into that. But first, before we do, who are the founding members, and how many members do you have today?
We have 16 members today, but the founding members were 10 of the largest biopharmaceutical companies, the big ones, and they are the founding members. And we have 6 new members that just joined us, and those are of varying sizes, including a very small company, plus some companies that have significant spends. And then the founding members are the companies that you would be familiar with if you wrote down the top 10, 12 biopharmaceutical companies in the world.
So the small companies, which is what I was going to ask, they're welcome.
Very much so. Yeah. And right now, beyond the fact that Braeburn Pharmaceuticals, which is a very small biotechnology company, has joined us as a member, we have interest from a significant number of smaller companies who would like to participate in Trancelerate, benefit from the outputs of Trancelerate, and to be able to contribute is what I'm hearing. So folks are extremely energized by what we're trying to do here. I think we focused in on some areas we'll talk about in a minute, and those just seem to make sense to many of my colleagues across the clinical trial environment.
Yeah, and I'd point out that we are seeing so many small specialty pharmas, if you will, crop up. Mm-hmm. They really probably bring quite a bit to the table.
They sure do. They sure do. Yeah. I think the smaller companies over the years, the mid-sized companies, the smaller companies, have learned to be more efficient through necessity faster than the larger, bigger companies. It's not to say that larger companies are inefficient, but it has been slower for them to become more efficient. And part of the reason that they're participating so robustly and with tremendous energy in Trancelerate is that they are looking at this Trancelerate configuration to help the member companies come together and streamline processes that just make sense to streamline.
You mentioned earlier that it's pre-competitive. Was it nonetheless how challenging was it to get, for instance, the founding members to play together in the sandbox?
I think it was reasonably enthusiastically well received. I would say that there are always concerns. Well, what does it mean? And the competitive juices often sometimes start to flow. But I will tell you that I have seen very little of it among the member companies. The general theme is, let's get this done. Let's find ways to collaborate to improve the environment for bringing drugs to patients faster. We've tackled clinical trials, but there are other areas such as target validation and areas around the clinical trials and drug development ecosystem that we haven't yet tackled. But clinical trials was an obvious pain point. And so that's what we started off with. And it's not been hard to get enthusiasm in the member companies because we all realize we have to do this.
Yeah. Building on that, was there sort of a consensus? Was it a natural move to determine that clinical trials should be the first initiative that was tackled, or was this something? How did that come about?
So a number of my colleagues over the year got together. They sequenced out a number of potential things we could do together from sort of pre-competitive landscape, some in clinical trials, some outside the clinical trial environment, for example, target validation, preclinical. And the consensus seemed to have gelled into, let's go for clinical trials. They seem to have the most obvious need. They have a significant return on investment on the things we're trying to do. And more than that, they were practical. There were things we could do. We could see how to do them. They would return quickly to the member companies and to the general environment. So with that sequencing of ideas, we decided to pick clinical trials. And from clinical trials to start 5 initiatives immediately.
Okay. Let me step back just one second. Are you involving input from regulators, from agencies? You're a global organization. Different regulatory issues depending on where you are? Are you? Very
much so.
Yeah.
Not only in the outputs of the ongoing work streams that we have, but really from the inception. Members of the FDA and others were very actively involved in supporting the creation of Trancelerate.
From the outset?
From the outset.
Wow.
I think there's value for all in this, but it's not just for the member companies that are funding Trancelerate that there's value. There's value for investigators. We really are going to try to reduce the burden at the investigative site. That burden creates inefficiency, it creates cost, it reduces our ability to invest in more drugs. There is some amazingly elegant science out there, and we have to catch up to the science and develop some of that targets that we've developed into drugs. Right now, the value proposition's just not there. It costs us too much money to get a drug approved. So reducing the cost of developing drugs, making it easier for investigators, for regulators, for the biopharmaceutical companies, I should say, will have a knock-on effect in pulling more drugs into the pipeline, and hopefully we can deliver more medications and medicines to the patients who need them.
So we now I'm going to shift back again. So we kind of touched on how you arrived at the decision to focus on clinical. How is that specifically determined, what to focus on, and equally importantly, who actually conducts and manages Trancelerate's research projects?
Sure. Well, let me take your first part of your question.
Yeah.
As I said to you, a group of very smart people got together.
Right.
They sequenced out all the things that Trancelerate could do, focused it down to clinical trials, and then within clinical trials came up with a number of projects. And some of those, I guarantee you, if I go and pull 100 people from this particular conference who deal with clinical trials every day, you would probably come up with a very, very similar list to the first 5 or the first 10 or the first 15, because we all know where the inefficiencies lie. It's getting ourselves the energy and focus to try to do something about it, which is what we're trying to do with Trancelerate. So the clinical trials area was sort of something that naturally evolved to the top as a pain point that we can tackle.
I see.
And then this learned group, shall we say, got together and said, well, what are the projects within the larger clinical trial space that make sense? We have selected 5 projects, and those projects are ongoing, and the projects are managed by members from the member companies. So the member companies of Trancelerate fund Trancelerate in 2 ways. They pay subscription, membership dues, and they provide support through in-kind support, people. And these are not just people who have nothing better to do in a member company. These are some of their best brains and some of their brightest people who have been assigned to Trancelerate. So our projects are managed by member company people. And we have some funding, as I said to you, cash funding, which supports the infrastructure of the company, and so on and so forth. But the actual work is done by staff from the member companies.
You mentioned projects. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now? Have you seen any results? Where along are you?
So we have 5 projects, as I said. One of them is a project on risk-based monitoring, an area that many people in this conference and in the clinical trial space are very familiar with. We're all trying to smartly monitor clinical trials.
Absolutely.
And expend our efforts in monitoring clinical trials where the effort should be spent versus areas where we can perhaps step down our focus, not to sacrifice quality per se, but to be smart about where we tackle the monitoring paradigm at a clinical site. So the risk-based monitoring project is a project that's evolved over the last 6 months. The team has done a phenomenal job. We are going to publish a position paper on the risk-based monitoring project by the end of May.
Wonderful.
We'll put it on the Trancelerate website. It will be available to all and anybody in the clinical trial ecosystem, and not just to the member companies, to comment on. The regulators, certainly the EMA and the FDA, have provided comment, and we'll incorporate that comments, I should say. Once we publish, or I should say post this position paper on our website, we're going to invite comment from the clinical trials community to that paper so that it can evolve from there. And we're going to run 2 pilots on the risk-based monitoring paper this quarter, 2 more pilots in the 3rd quarter, and 2 more pilots in the 4th quarter. So this is a very real project that's made some very real progress. And hopefully these pilots and the community feedback will inform us on this next iteration of the position paper and the iteration after, so we can improve it and hone it to our needs.
It's absolutely extraordinary. One last question for you, and that is, are you actively recruiting new members at this point?
Very much so, very much so. But I should really mention the other 4 projects that we are ongoing, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
apart from the risk-based monitoring project, we have another project on site qualification and training. Now, that's a project that, as I said to you, these are projects folks in the corridors of this conference could write down and say, this just makes sense. We, as an industry, qualify a site. We make sure that they're GCP trained. And so on for a clinical trial within a member company, a pharmaceutical company. And then another pharmaceutical company comes along and does the same thing all over again. So through this work stream, we're going to find a way to not repeat the process. Once you qualify a site, once they're certified to be GCP trained, we will provide the member companies the certification so that they can bypass the effort of doing it all over again. Common sense, right? But we haven't done it in the past, and so this is another project. Again, one that's making tremendous progress. Let me assure you, it's not easy to get 10 to 16 biopharmaceutical companies to agree to anything, but I can tell you, risk-based monitoring project I mentioned earlier, site qualification and training, these companies have come together and agreed on ways to do this. And that in itself is a very strong message on the willingness of the industry to say, we really got to tackle these things. Our 3rd project is a site portal project, shared site portal. we make it really painful for investigator sites. You know, we all have different portals. They look different. You have different usernames and passwords. Some study coordinators have 45 to 50 stickies around their monitor just trying to remember passwords and names from all the different portals from the different companies. So the idea here is, can we come up with a portal with which we share information with investigative sites and internally within the member companies that's common to the Trancelerate members? And we're tackling that. Another project is data standards. The data standards project, many years ago, certainly over the years I should say, CDISC, which is an organization that's been around for a number of years, has helped standardize data for safety, for example. We're now tackling efficacy. In collaboration with CDISC and CFAST and Critical Path Institute, the FDA, Trancelerate, collectively working to bring more therapeutic standards faster than they would otherwise. So what Trancelerate's doing there is providing expertise and funding as opposed to doing the project ourselves.
I see.
And so in the 5 projects that I'm going to mention to you, including, let me just go through the last one then. Yeah. And the last project is our comparators project, okay? So the member companies at Trancelerate are going to share comparators amongst themselves. Right now, if you do a comparative clinical trial, you have to source the comparator drug typically from the open market and sometimes from the member company through bilateral agreements. But it's not an efficient process. There is counterfeit drug in the supply chain. There are issues. The FDA, for example, EMA is starting to really focus in on temperature excursions of drug and transport. We've always done that with cold supply. We're now starting to do that with solid dosage forms. All these things make it obvious that the member companies can collaborate to provide each other comparators versus us sourcing them from the open market with insufficient information on temperature excursions, for example, some of the analyses data that you might need. So this project's coming along, and we hope this quarter to actually have 2 transactions take place through the Trancelerate comparator project. Again, what I'm illustrating to you, these projects aren't just conceptual. They are delivering real results and real return on the investment of the member companies and for hopefully investigative sites and the wider clinical trials environment.
All I can say is I think that what you're doing is absolutely extraordinary, and years ago I think would have been almost unheard of.
Well, it just wasn't painful enough for us to get together, and I think that the pain is very much here, and we're trying to do that. So in the future of Trancelerate is we will, in short order, look at another tranche of projects. Some may be line extensions, shall we say, of the ongoing projects, because you know we haven't taken massive steps. We've taken smart steps, but once we make those projects more successful, there may be some natural areas those could go to. And then there are some really interesting potential future projects. For example, placebo data sharing among the member companies, standard of care data sharing among the member companies, just to, you know, the better use of minority investigators and patients in clinical trials. So there are a number of potential projects, as I said to you, that we are thinking about, and we hope to launch towards the end of 2013 and 2014.
6 months, very meaningful progress, and everybody wins. Really an incredible model. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really, the congratulation really goes to my member companies and the folks from those member companies who dedicate significant amount of energy and time every day to these projects while they have a day job. And I admire those folks tremendously. And I hope we'll sit down here another day and tell you about the progress we made on the current initiatives and all the new initiatives we hope to launch in the future.
I absolutely would love that. And the great thing, going back to what you said, is these are big brains that they're sending to the table here.
Absolutely. I mean, these are leaders among the organizations. My board is made up, and I should say my board, my Trancelerate board, is made up of R&D heads from these companies. They have many, many things they can do in their day jobs, and they invest time and effort to making sure that they give the attention to Trancelerate, because the upside of the value that we hope to bring more medications to patients faster is so compelling today.
A labor of love, absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing with us today, and congratulations again, and I can't wait to hear more from you.
Thank you very much for having me here today.
On that note, that concludes this episode of Inside Clinical. I'm Marc Dresner. Thanks for tuning in.